Okay, sound okay? Yeah, good. Well, good morning. This is great. This is my first time in Argentina. Until yesterday, I thought it always rained in Argentina. Because I come from in Oregon in the U.S., an area where it always rains too, but not so hard. Anyway, I wanted to start the day off here talking about the context that we're working within the day, and not so much specifically in this talk about small talk, although we'll touch on it a couple places, but as you work with small talk or whatever technology you're working with, some of the things you might be thinking about as you progress. And I call it here, welcome to the ambient computing era. So let's talk about what the English word era means. So the one dictionary says it's a long and distinct period of history with some particular feature or characteristic. So it's a time that you can characterize some way. I actually kind of like what Wikipedia says. It's a span of time which, if you look before and after it, you can see that there was something distinct about that span that made it different. And so we're talking about eras of computing. We're really going to be talking about what makes each era distinct and different. So in the first era of computing, computers looked something like this. And this is actually sort of a late mainframe computer. But I actually, when I was in university, I used computers that looked like this, and I even punched some cards and stuff, right? So computers, in the first era of computing, computers were big, giant machines and very, very expensive. And because of that, they were really only used by large organizations, corporations, governments, large universities and stuff. Those were the only places that really had access to computers. And so computers were used to empower, enhance activities that those organizations did, whether it was tracking resources for manufacturing or sending out bills to customers or keeping inventory. But they were used to make large organizations more efficient. And that era spanned about 30 years. It started in the early 1950s and reached its peak probably in the late 1970s. But it goes on forever. I mean, those uses never stop. But so as we talk about eras, though, we really aren't talking about people stopping doing things, but we're talking about what was the predominant thing that was going on during that period of time. And so around, in the early 1980s, we started seeing this new phenomena. Personal computers came along, right? And it was a real change in how people used computers, thought about computers. In fact, it was the first time that people actually used computers. So the change there was that the computers then became a focus for empowering and enhancing people doing personal tasks that they need to accomplish. Kind of analogous to what they did for corporations, but now doing it for individual people. And if you look at kind of what PCs are good for, well, it's going and doing some task-focused thing. Maybe it's you're a writer, you're using a word processor and you write a document, or you're in accounting and you use spreadsheets, or you're searching for information, or you're even playing games. But these are all sort of task-focused things that, as an individual, you say, I want to do something, and you go do it. In one sense, the personal computer was a destination device for people. You would stand up and say, I'm going to go do some work using that device. And in fact, if you look at, you can contrast here a personal computing workplace where a person might in their home go and work, and what they would have done before there were personal computers. And they looked very, you can make them look very similar. It's both a place where you go and you focus on a task. And so the PC era was very much task-focused like that. But it became so valuable that, anyone who was what we sometimes call a knowledge worker eventually had to have a device like that. And to tell you, reached a point like this, kind of in the late personal computing era where PCs, everybody seems to have one and stuff. So there's another word in English for this, is ubiquitous. Ubiquitous means present, appearing, or found everywhere. So by the end of the personal computing era, PCs became very ubiquitous. Anybody doing some work would have a PC. Now, around not quite 10 years ago, I think we started to see something change. And here's a good illustration of what that change was. Now, these, if you haven't seen this picture, these are both pictures of the crowd waiting for the announcement of who a new pope was going to be. Okay, so in 2005, you can see these people there milling outside the Vatican waiting, and then 2003, the same thing. And what's the difference between those two pictures? Well, down here, 2013. That's right. So, so you can say suddenly, you see people here who aren't going somewhere to use a computing device to do some task. They're just living with it. They have it there with them, and they're as part of their life. They're trying to capture an event here, and again, those devices are ubiquitous. They're everywhere and stuff. So, but my title of this talk wasn't about the ubiquitous computing era. It's about the ambient computing era, and so I want to make a distinction about what that means. But let's go back here and sort of look here at these eras of computing again. So we showed, around 1980s, personal computing started to then come on and dominate. But we said an era is a place where practices and fashions change to a significant degree. So it's pretty clear from like that picture we had of the people waiting for the Pope that around 2008, 2009, 2010, something started to change. And what started, and that the way people interacted and used computers starting to change, and that some sort of new era was emerging of what computing. And so the question is, what is this era about? What's the characteristics of it? And how should we as software developers be responding to that? So new era of computing. What's this all about? Well, I think it's about computing augmenting our life, right? Before it was about doing tasks. Now it's computers are just becoming part of the environment we live in. They actually augment the environment. They augment how we live. They give us, again, ubiquitous access to information. It means we're always plugged in. Have access, so they've expanded our head in one sense, and we don't think about them as so much as computers anymore. They're just devices. They're things out there. They're part of the world. They're one way I think a modern person looks at it. It's these devices just enhance the world I live in. I need my stuff. It's part of it. I have my digital data, my applications, my data, my music, my connections, my friends. I need it. I always need it. I need it right now. If I'm disconnected, I feel lost. I don't know what to do. I need it to be available all the time. I really just can't live without that stuff. And another way to look at that same thing is, this is just a recent data I found that says, it's showing where, this is from the US, but saying where how people connect from various locations, okay, right? And you can see here, for example, 50% of people, connect in the bathroom, or in the bedroom, or, during their commute or at a friend's house, right? So they're always connecting with these devices. Really, it's encompassing, going back to that basic idea, this is encompassing their whole life, their entire life. And so, again, the sense of ambient, it's always there, always present. So let's talk about the word ambient. It means of the surrounding area or the environment, completely surrounding, encompassing. And so that's really the world we're moving into, one where we are surrounded by computation, by smart devices, the smart physical world, and we have to live inside that world. And as software developers, we have to create that world. And so, there you have. So this is what I like to call this new era of computing, is ambient computing. That's computers enhance our environment. And as you can see here, we're just at the beginning. We aren't at the end, and I'm going to talk quite a bit more about that. But and it's going to go on. If it's like the previous eras, it's going to span at least 30 years. Maybe longer. It's hard, it's hard to know for sure, but we're really right now at the transition period of a major change, and that change is going to span the careers of most of you in this room. So, right, and just this is whenever I give a version of this talk, I kind of have to go and update some things on this slide because over the course of a year, things that are new are now old and stuff. But again, it's important. We're talking about not just smartphones, not just PCs sitting on your desk that are wired to the world, but all sorts of devices, sort of anything you can imagine that has some intelligence in it. That's what the world of ambient computing is about. Some other data here, just in case you don't believe this, but I'm not really too worried about that. But you can see here, the blue line here, this is the sales in millions of personal computers, right? So computers, back there in the 2000s, personal computers sort of reached the saturation point. Everybody who needed one had one and stuff. And it's kind of flat here. Kind of like in the previous era corporate computing became, right? But you can see the number of PC. So the green line is smartphones. The red line is tablets. Way outnumber now the number of PCs. And so last week I read some data, and it was approximately, it said, the amount of computing power Apple sold 2 weeks ago when they introduced, the first day the iPhone 6 became available, the amount of computing power they sold in that day was greater than all the computing power in the world 10 years ago. Okay? In one day. So we really do have exponential growth in terms of computing becoming available in our environment. So when I first started thinking about this idea of ambient computing and a new era of computing, one of the things that started me thinking about this was this graph that I found somewhere. And what this is showing is during the personal computing era, from about 1975 here up to 2011, what was the most commonly used personal computer platform? Okay, and the big blue area you see here is the so-called IBM PC, or the Wintel PC, really, is what it's talking about, the Windows-based machines. And you can see that there is first this period where there was a lot of noise, lots of chaos, lots of different things, TRS-80s and Ataris and Commodores and Amigas and Apple IIs and all sorts of things here fighting for dominance of what was for the emergence of the personal computing era. What was a personal computer going to be like? And then, and it took about 10 years, one thing started to emerge. And when that thing emerged, pretty rapidly, it took over everything. Pretty much everything else went away. Until you got to the end here and you started seeing something was happening here. There's starting to be new devices here showing up. And this is actually percentage, right? Because it's not that the number of these devices went down here, but it's as a percentage they went down. In the same way over here, these huge things aren't, these are very small numbers of devices compared to what we're talking about over here, but in terms of percentage of the total market or the total usage, it was real high. And so I thought this was kind of very interesting and descriptive of what happens over the course of a computing era. And my previous experience, kind of at the tail end of the corporate computing era, made me think that, well, you know, it was very similar. Because you could take this away and make that be 1950 to 1980, and you would have seen that for the first 10 or 15 years, there were many companies building various sorts of mainframe computers, and then IBM began to dominate. And by the end, IBM was almost total control. Most of the other companies had disappeared. And then something started happening. What started happening was this, right? We're kind of now in the PC era. And so that makes me think, it started making me think, well, is the ambient computing era going to look any different from this? Maybe it's going to look just like this. And what's that going to mean if it does? And so it's important. One of my points here is, as we talk about ambient computing and the ambient computing era, is to remember it's a span like this, and we're over at this side of it right now. Okay? So if you go back, again, look at the personal computing era, you know, early on there are some pretty odd-looking things going on. Nobody actually knew what a personal computer was going to be like. Now, as small talkers, we actually know we had an inspiration. There was a visionary out there, Alan Kay, and the group of people working for him, who had a very strong vision, kind of projected ahead 20 years and said, here's what personal computing could be like. They even coined the term personal computing, right? And it's going to say, here's what it could be like. And it kind of ended up that way, right? There was a good vision. But people working in industry, it took a long time for that to latch on and built things like this. This, by the way, is what in about 1982 passed as a portable computer. It was sort of a suitcase-sized thing and had this little tiny screen. That's an Osborne 1. Well, the other interesting thing, if you look there, these early days, and just, you know, we didn't really know how people would interact with these machines. What displays would look like? How would you present information? This was, again, early 80s. This was typically what you would see on one of these screens. Right? So, by the way, that's like one of the first spreadsheets. This is a word processor, and this is Oregon Trail. But, so this looks so incredibly primitive to what we're used to today. But remember, it only took about 15 years to go from time-shared mainframe like that, where interacting on a terminal was the only way an individual would ever have access to a computer, to something that looks like this, which is, the corners aren't quite rounded the same way and stuff, but that's pretty much what this is, right? It had been established there, and it didn't take all that long. And so as we go into the ambient computing era, I think one of the important things to think about is those devices over there on the right, those aren't the endpoints of the ambient computing era. They're the starting point. And so, the challenge for all of us is, what's this going to be? Okay. What is the real ambient computing experience going to be like? And one of the things I get concerned about to some degree is, I'm not sure if I've yet seen a visionary comparable to Alan Kay who's kind of telling us what it's going to be. Now, it's actually not that hard to say, well, 25 years ago, the chairs will have processors in them, and we'll know when we sit in them and stand up, and whether we're uncomfortable, and we'll adjust, and that computers are plugged in everywhere and stuff. That's not too hard, but the real kind of personal experience, I think, there's not too many people who are yet laying out what that's going to be like. And we need that, right? So another way to think about why we really have to stretch our imagination to know what things are going to be like. So this big radar dome here is actually a golf ball. And so this right here, and this is pretty modern, so that's a 32-bit ARM processor, 48 megahertz, not too much RAM, but you can put another chip, actually even smaller than that, right next to it, and have a gigabyte of RAM or so, and it costs 75 cents. Okay, and that's today, right? And so again, extrapolate ahead 15 years, and I'm not the person to make this observation initially, but computers are going to be like grains of sand. They're going to be everywhere. And they have radios in them, so they can all talk. Okay? So that's the world we're creating, the world of ambient devices surrounding us, shaping our environment. I was going to say here, by the way, this, at least in terms of the processor and stuff, is pretty comparable to this. So that's another way to look at this is about 30 years from this to that. Okay. So let's go back again to this PC graph, and I filed off here the names of the companies and stuff, and I changed the years here from 2011 to 2050, and I say, well, if things are going to work like they worked last time around, then we're over here somewhere. And you see that. You see there are new devices coming along. Last year everybody thought Samsung was taking over the world. This year, Samsung not so much. Somebody else. Different devices, different technologies. It's still chaos. It's chaotic, right? That's what's happening, and it hasn't yet been pinned down. Now, going back to the PC era, having worked across this entire spectrum, I have to say here, this is a much, much more interesting time to be an engineer, a software developer, than it is here. This is like 1999. Microsoft rules the world. You have to build on Windows. Everything is pinned down. There's not a lot of innovation going around. Everything you do is pretty much been dictated by the technology curve. But this is really exciting, right? And that's now. So when we look at that curve, like I said, it's not all that hard to project out 15, 20, 25 years and kind of dream what it might be like. And people like Alan Kay did that with the PC era. But what you can't know, if you look at what happened during the PC era, you actually can't predict how you're going to get there. You can't, what business models? Well, the business models that proved successful for the PC era didn't exist at the beginning. They just kind of developed over the time. Same way in the ambient computing era. The business models that will dominate are things that are created by trial and error during that period. So what companies are going to dominate? You can't predict. You may think today that Apple's going to be the star. Yeah, maybe not. I think it's still too early to say. You don't really know which hardware, which software is going to end up being the winner. Wherever there are alternatives, which one. A lot of these things are often seem random in retrospect. It's some company happened to introduce the right product, a product that people wanted that happened to use a particular technology, and then other people adopt that same technology, and it was no real planning. It just is random. It's really, really random. And so you can't plan for that stuff. You just simply have to live with it, kind of surf the technology curve and adapt and be ready for failures and try the next big thing. That's kind of what it's like living in the age of chaos. But some of the things we know you can do, Alan Kay had a suggestion for how you do it. He says, well, just go in and, the best way to predict the future is invent it. So that's something we can all do, is we can all be trying to invent the future we want to have and do our part to influence it. And then particularly as software developers, we really should be shaping, the ambient computing world that we want to live in, because we have more power to do that than most other people, right? And kind of we know both the upside and the downside of what can be done with computing and such. And one of some of the fundamental issues like, do we want to be customers or merchandise, right? Are these new devices we're building, are they really going to kind of empower us as people and help us do more things, or are they really just ways for people to extract money from us, So we have a say in all that. We can influence it. We can, even when we're working on commercial products and stuff, we can bring a perspective of how is this good for people or not good for people and such. So there's what a purported Chinese curse is, which is "May you live in interesting times." Now, I think some people say that's not really a Chinese curse and somebody made this up, but it really doesn't matter. It's "May you live in interesting times." I think this is really one of some of the most interesting times as software people to be living in. We're all here, and I think the key thing is here. Enjoy. This is really the time to, as software developers, we're ruling the world, so let's get out there and do that stuff. And I would say anywhere in the world you can do this, right? Because you don't have to be in the U.S., you don't have to be in Europe, you do it in Argentina too. The technology for doing all of this is available to all of us. And so, I want to see great things coming out of Argentina. Okay? Thank you. Yeah.
I have two questions. One is related to the physical limits that we are starting to see in, the microprocessors and all those things. How do you think that is going to influence this ambient computing era? And the second one is also how do you think the open source movement is going to influence? Because it's different, that social movement is completely different from the computing era 20 years ago.
It is. Well, so first of all, okay, so I'm not a physicist. But what I read suggests we still have quite a few years of Moore's law in front of us in terms of making things smaller. But really, maybe even more importantly, kind of the ambient computing concept is more about having huge numbers of these things rather than, maybe each device is less powerful, but if they get down to the size and cost of a grain of sand, and they're getting pretty close, then you get lots of them. That's why parallel computing in various forms, I think, is so important right now. People are paying so much attention to it. In terms of open source software, open source software is kind of become the foundation of almost everything we do, right? Because at least if you look at the lowest level of the most widely used devices, they tend to be based on Linux or other open source forms of Unix. They are built with languages that have open source implementations. And the commercial focus has moved away from at least system software of that sort to really the services, the cloud services or the higher level applications and stuff. It kind of comes down to is there's a lot more money to be made by doing useful things for people than it is to selling an operating system, because nobody actually in the world actually wants to buy an operating system, right? Because these computing devices, including their operating systems, are just part of the walls, It's any other questions?
No, I just wanted to ask.
Okay.
So you think the new ambient hardware or device is going to come from a company or from the open source community, an open hardware community?
Well, so people have to manufacture things, right? So
now you can start manufacturing at home.
Yeah, well, that's right. I didn't get into the whole 3D printing thing and stuff. Although people aren't yet 3D printing electronics, microelectronics yet. I don't know. I mean, that goes back to, I think that goes back to my things you can't predict, right? You can predict 20 years out that we will have this environment that is computerized in that way, but will it come from a commercial vendor? Will it come from open source? Will it come from some sort of new hybrid way of creating software? I think it could happen anyway, any of those ways, and we're just going to have to live through it, influence it where we may, where we can't, just adapt to it. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And how it starts right now, and that it looks like how long do you believe it's going to happen?
Well, for example, all I can say is that the two previous eras seem to last about 30 years. And it may be, and maybe 30 years is about a generation or maybe two, maybe in terms of software people, 2 generations of people. And so maybe that has something to do with it. Maybe it's going to go longer. I mean, but presumably at some point something comes after it. But we can't really imagine what it is. world was changing really fast back here, right? That was kind of the whole point of let me show you one more. Of this picture is lots and lots of change here. I guess I would call this experimental change, right? That people didn't know the best way to bring personal computing to the entire world. So there was lots of experimentation. A lot of it was commercial experimentation in terms of people deciding they'd build a machine that looked like this, or build a machine that looked like that, or use this sort of software. And they'd experiment and they would battle each other in the marketplace. But it was rapid change, very chaotic. And it only stabilized when kind of the dominant good enough solution emerged. And I expect that that's the same thing as that is happening right now. But after things stabilize, once it became stable, that stability lasts quite a while, right? It's more of an assimilation now. Now that we have the kind of the right way to do it, now this stuff actually can become pervasive so that everybody is involved with it. So, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Your observation is repeated on a qualitative basis almost all over technology.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we have a lot going back for hundreds of years, that 30-year time frame.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, so we're probably about out of time here for the next. Okay, we have time. Okay. No.
Your model, I really should but you said like these big areas, creation and so immersed in this last change, I can follow it here, and I can see some unit space, things flowing from the PC to the handheld to the PC. Do you think it's going to still be done that we are still not seeing?
So it was the same way back here. It was the same way back here. Before we had personal computers, we had time-shared computers, which were big machines with lots of terminals, and to a certain degree, each of those terminals was kind of like a personal computer. And if you actually looked at the early personal computer operating systems, they used the same commands. They had command shells very much like those time-shared computers, and people actually, one of those late period mainframe operating systems was Unix, which migrated here over into the infrastructure layer of much of the personal computing era. So as you're going through this, month to month, year to year, you tend to see what appears to be incremental changes. It's only when you kind of give it time to run its course and you get to say, in 1980, this is what I'm doing, and in 1995, this is what I'm doing. You say, this is really something very, very different, even though the technology underpinnings of this are that.
The real difference is it the relationship with user and reach.
That's right. I think that's the defining thing of these eras is, again, how do users interact with these machines? What do they do for people and stuff? And like I say, I think this era is simply about computers disappearing into the environment. Okay? So I'll be around, so happy to talk about this and other things as we go forward. Thank you.